Hey everyone, I'm Brandon Lee. Welcome to this edition of Escaping Rock Bottom, the podcast. I have Richard on. Richard works over at Calvary Healing Center, and they're one of our partners here at Art of Our Soul. Calvary's been around the Phoenix area, I want to say for 50 years, 50 plus?
Give or take, yeah.
Give or take, right? It's one of the longest standing treatment facilities in Arizona. And it has such a great program. There's been a revitalization, I would say, over the past year or so over at Calvary. So, Richard, it's good to have you here in the podcast studio.
It's good to be here.
All right, awesome. Richard, with everybody, I always just kind of want them to get to know you. Take me back to your childhood. Where were you born and raised?
Well, I was born in Arizona, but promptly moved to Pittsburgh and Ohio, kind of back and forth for a few years. Sister was born out in Ohio, and then was back in Arizona in time to start first grade. So I have some memories from that, but for the most part, I was raised in Arizona for the majority of life that would matter for most of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always say it's still a little rare for me to meet natives.
Yeah.
It's such a, transient state, right? So many people from out of state come here, and it's just like a melting pot of everything. So it is kind of cool to meet a native. Take me back to the childhood. What did that look like for you?
Well, when we moved back, it was for my dad to take a job. He worked in technology. He worked as an electronical engineer in the semiconductor electronic side of it. I don't know much about it, if I'm very honest. But with that, we originally moved to Mesa, and not necessarily one of the best areas. One of my earliest memories is the kid I used to play with down the house. Their house got raided by the DEA, if I remember right, or it might have just been local Leos, but not necessarily the best place to grow up. So as soon as my dad kind of worked his way up in that field, as soon as we could afford it, we were off to Scottsdale. So I spent my formative years as a teenager, the stuff that usually shapes and molds people without anything happening earlier anyways, living in North Scottsdale, which was interesting to say the least. So that's...
Yeah.
Went to Pinnacle High School. It was the first graduating class through Pinnacle High School. First year there was the first year it opened. And with that, I was also separated from anybody I'd made friends with in middle school. And from middle school, I was separated with anybody I made friends with in elementary school. So there was a lot of interesting separations there.
Yeah, interesting. What was that feeling like? Like, did you ever feel like you didn't fit in? Did you feel like this wasn't your tribe? Did you feel like uncomfortable in your own skin?
Very, very much so. I find the commonality a lot in just recovery in general is that's usually one of the things people pick out from just being raised and growing up is kind of a feeling of not necessarily finding your people, for lack of another way of saying it. And with we didn't move as frequently as some people I know, but we moved enough to where it was kind of starting over. And then I had this like, oh, cool, I'm going to go to high school with all my friends that I went to middle school with, and then they opened Pinnacle, and now I'm one of, I think, 10 kids that I knew, only 2 of which were actually friends of mine going there. And with the moves, too, like, I was always the weird kid as well, right? You're the new kid. You kind of get that label right away. But that being said, I kind of was the weird kid just because I didn't have a solid group of friends. I'd never really had that best friend because I never had time to establish that at a lot of places. And I also was the kid who, wanted to watch Discovery Channel and listen to the weird music and was the skateboarder when it wasn't cool and all that sort of stuff, right? So I immediately gravitated towards the things I like to do because I didn't have time to worry about what other people thought and what was cool to do.
That's interesting. And, when we really identify as trauma being the gateway to substance use disorder, trauma looks different for everybody.
Yeah.
And traumatic experiences look so different for everybody, for me, there was a lot of child molestation and just a lot of physical and mental abuse as a child. But I tell people, too, the simple act of either moving around a lot, moving from school to school, whether the parents' jobs, that to a child is traumatic in and of itself. And trauma is trauma. It impacts the body and the brain in almost the exact same ways. So the severity from a perspective, one trauma may look more severe than the other, but it doesn't matter. Because trauma is trauma, the way it impacts the brain and it impacts the bodies. And so it's really important, I think, for so many people to understand it's not about the severity of the trauma, it's just addressing what that trauma is. And your situation, that is just traumatic for a child to be moved around, to not feel like they fit into a group of friends, to not feel like they have those things.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I have an interesting job as a case manager at Calvary. I'm still allowed to run groups with patients and things. And when we get on topics of trauma, Granted, I can't help them process these things, but I can talk about aspects like that. And it's one of the things I always bring up is my trauma is not what your trauma is, but it may feel like that to me, right? It may be the worst thing I've ever experienced is that I was the 5'7" kid who was always from a new school and carried around a skateboard and a camera with him at all times and got pointed out as weird. That might not be as bad on an outsider's perspective's view as far as other people's trauma goes, but to me, that's a 10, right? That's a 10 on the scale, and that really created my formative years with that as well. And with those traumas too, I mean, that was a big part of it, but the other part of it too, undiagnosed ADHD the majority of my life. I was the gifted kid, right, that was always told you should be doing better than this, and really it was a lot of failures for things that I didn't understand that my own brain was sabotaging, right? So there was a lot of that coupled in there with it.
You know, when people don't feel comfortable in their own skin, I was one of them. And I mean, I knew I was gay as a teenager in junior high school, but, you know, back in the early 90s, it just definitely wasn't socially acceptable. And so, you know, having, you know, and also being an athlete, like it didn't fit the stereotype as well. So that just made it even more difficult, right? And so I began to use drugs, and also from the child abuse, began to use drugs at age 15 to begin to numb out. Now, granted, my frontal lobe isn't fully formed at age 15, so all I could process was, well, I just feel better and more accepted and more comfortable in my own skin when I use this substance.
Yeah,
right? So I kept using a substance to just feel good.
And that's a huge part of it too. And for a lot of us that have those experiences too, we tend to start the isolation aspect early, right? For me, it was eye-opening at my first college party when I got so hammered I called an ex-girlfriend and got her little brother at 3 a.m, but I was able to socialize at the same time and talk to people and feel like I was myself for the first time in a long time. And really what that was is me just kind of shutting out the issues that were in my brain.
Yeah, I remember I was about 16, 17 years old because I used to drive out. I grew up in Southern California, and so in the beach communities, and I used to drive out to Indio, and actually Indian reservations where they used to have outdoor raves back in the 90s. And so that was around 96, 97. And I used to drive out there alone. Like sometimes we would drive to a map point, get a map as to where the rave was. But I used to go alone and just meet people, like total strangers out there. So that isolation, you know, in activities, almost a double life, right? The people I played soccer with, they would never go to those raves, nor did I even tell them that I was going to those raves.
Right. My friends in real life didn't know. I mean, I was very good at hiding my addiction for that same thing. Like I would mask it almost, right? But then if I didn't have somebody to go to the bar with and I would hide how much I was drinking or how much I was using when it was drugs from them, I would still go by myself to these places. Or when it got really bad, I wouldn't even contact my real friends, so they had no idea what was going on. It's a complete double life, right? Nobody really understands the issue that's there, and seeking out those places where I could be free with that issue was a big part of it.
Yeah, gosh. When did that, I always ask people, when did you kind of hit your rock bottom where you ended up kind of changing your life? What age were you when, life got so bad that you finally got either help or you decided to get clean and sober?
Well, that's a bit of a loaded question to ask me because it was about a year of me knowing I needed help. I was about 30. And it had just come to light to my wife that how bad my drinking really was. And granted, it had been that bad since we met, I believe. And when we met, I was even faking sober at that time, if I remember right. But when I was about 30, I got a bottle of a bag of empty vodka bottles thrown in my face from when she went down to my car to grab something, right? And it was, this is my immediate breakdown, ugly tears, ugly crying, I need help, but not understanding what that looked like. And then kind of a cycle of that for the next couple of months. And then finally saying, okay, I'll go to these AA meetings I've heard about. And then showing up to those very hungover, hiding that I'm drinking, and getting a sponsor who I knew I could pull the wool over his eyes and not taking the suggestions. And this was a year of me really wanting the help, but at the same time not taking the suggestions that were there. And it kind of all came to a head when my godmother passed away, which is another trauma I endured with this. And with that, finding her AA stuff and memorabilia and finding out that she was in recovery and thinking on it and the phrases she used to say and it all kind of making sense, and then still not processing it. And then 3 months later of faking sober, picking up a lot of not real chips, finally getting the ultimatum of go to treatment or we're getting a divorce. And at that point I finally went, okay, it's time to just do whatever anybody tells me to do.
Yeah. Gosh, and you were around what age at that time? 30?
I was 30 years old when I went to treatment. I'm 36 or 30. As you get older, it's harder to remember what age you are. I think I'm 36.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I got sober when I was 29. I'm 42 now. I don't count time in recovery anymore. It's not important to me. I don't even collect chips. I'm not one of those people anymore. I used to be for a long period of time. What was that early? What were those early stages of recovery like? I was just talking to somebody yesterday, actually, who was. It's like the 7th or 8th conversation I've had with him in the last 6 months. It's right. It's like they call you when they're hitting their rock bottom, and then. And I told them yesterday, I said, listen, man, I'm not your emotional ATM machine. I'm not here to give you a motivational speech every few weeks or every month. I've given you a list of resources and I've tried to get you into treatment. Now you've got to go make that step. What was that initial, I think one of the things we get a lot of pushback from in the treatment world, which we'll eventually get into what your job is over at Calvary and helping people, get them in and see what a program and recovery looks like. One of the big things that I get pushback for is I can't go to treatment. Like I can't just pack up my stuff and I can't be gone for 90 days. And my message to those people all the time is I'm like, listen, man, you continue this path. I mean, yeah, there's always the certainty of death, if you end up doing too much, but I don't even take it that extreme to them. I'm just like, listen, like your life's already a mess. You're worried about losing your job. Yeah, continue down this path. You're not going to have a job. Like you're worried about leaving your family for 90 days or 6 months. I'm like, okay, well, you're not going to have that family or anything at all if you don't invest this time. And it's such an investment into your life. But take me back to when I know that you were risking losing your marriage, right? And you hit your rock bottom, and then maybe that was the motivational factor for you to go to treatment.
Honestly, I got to be really honest with it. I more went to appease people, right? Like I had it in my head that I needed help, but I was more just resigning to get by another day, right? For me going in there, it was a culture shock to me, and I'll be very honest. I'm not a religious person, and Calvary has they have a religious track, and it was also one of the reasons why I think I didn't really jive well with 12-step from the beginning and had a hard time getting anything out of it. Is that's never been me. So I kind of shut down when I went in, honestly. But when we're talking those aspects of it, for me, I didn't have any reason to not step away. That's the thing. Like that whole thing of like, listen, we do this now so we have jobs and relationships in the future. I didn't need to worry about that. I could step away. I was thankfully I had a boss that was very understanding and who had done a lot of his own work on himself through self-help, addiction, and recovery in his past, and was fully supportive of me doing it and was like, yeah, go do what you need to do. My wife, was so sick of me that she wanted nothing more than for me to step away for 30 days so she could do some of her own healing as well, right? She didn't want to have to be worried about what I was doing all the time for 30 days, and she needed that. And I just knew I needed to get people off my back and knew I needed help in some way, but wasn't really sure that this was the way.
It's interesting because, the whole God thing, the whole faith and spirituality aspect, I mean, that can throw a lot of people, especially in the early stages of getting someone to go. They see the 12 steps, they see the word God in it, and they immediately shut down. And, what I try to also explain to people is the reason, why people shut down to that is because the version of God that they were taught as children was a fear-based God. It was a punishing God and a non-forgivable God. It's like you're going to go to hell if you behave this way. So the reason why people are oftentimes so standoffish and immediately kind of push back on the whole idea of faith and God and as part of spirituality and recovery, which I think is very, very necessary, to have spirituality within your program and in your life. But I think it's important that we begin to explain to people, listen, the way you were taught about God and the way you were taught about spirituality and faith was very perverted by human man. Man does such a disservice to God. Man does such a disservice to spirituality. in that the way we were raised, it just messed with our brains and our perspective and our perception. It's a better word of what God really is and what spirituality really is. And I think what I realized over time was that, listen, spirituality showed up in the form of a nurse who had saved my life from an overdose on life support, and she held my hand, and she showed me empathy and compassion, right? She didn't shame me, right? It was like these little godlike moments. God was never pushed down my throat in recovery. I also never went to treatment. I just went to meetings, which I wish I could redo. I always make sure I say that. Don't do what I did. And trust me, I had to white knuckle through a lot of shit that I wish I would have had more of a solid foundation to treat the trauma at the early stages, because I white knuckled for about a decade, if I'm being really honest. And so, what's kind of your experience with the whole God thing and getting people to understand, at least to get them past that?
So this is my favorite topic. I'm assuming there's people that will know this name. Henry Rojas, who used to work at Calvary as a spiritual counselor over there, was really kind of a big guide for me in this, because I'm still an atheist. I don't have those, I don't believe in the traditional side of that at all. And when I stepped into Calvary, I was a militant atheist. I was the one that was going to tell you were wrong for what you believe. And I'll never forget, I'm going through the steps that Calvary has you do, which we still do to this day. And 2 and 3 is dissecting a higher power and kind of an oral history of where you are and why you are where you are. And I didn't necessarily have those resentments against the church because of what I was raised in, because my dad was raised as a Catholic, and the old joke, I'm not a Catholic anymore because I was raised Catholic, right? And he still believed in traditional God, but never forced it on us. So I didn't have those experiences, but I had what I saw in media, and what I dictated, or what I found to be true to self, is these big things I would see about religion, pushing agendas that I didn't really think were productive for humanity. So that was the biggest problem I had with AA 12-step at first, is like, I don't even believe in a God. How are you? And you're telling me I have to find something. And I'll never forget going to sit with Pastor Henry and talk to him about this. And like, all of a sudden I was like in tears, and those tears were more for fear that I couldn't recover because I didn't believe in it. And but I wasn't going to change how I thought. That was what I knew as my truth, right? And with that, he helped me kind of dissect that and kind of understand that, like, it's okay that that's what I believe, and it doesn't matter. I'm, at the same time, and I've talked to others who have had this experience with him too. It was like, well, you're a man of God, and you're telling me it's okay that I'm an atheist. Like, it kind of like was, and with that, it helped me to kind of get past that and move past that, because I had a resentment towards your traditional God and the churches that I saw pushing these agendas that I didn't think were conducive for human growth. Right. And it's now my favorite part of my job at work is I see these kids come in that are immediately against 12-step and against faith-based. Like I said, I wouldn't, if I known how involved it was with some of the treatment aspects of things that I went through, I don't know that I would have gone to Calvary. But with that, now I get to find those kids, because let's face it, we're drunk when we choose to go to treatment, and we don't really look that deep into the program.
No.
But now I find these kids that are immediately against it. I'm like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how you can still absolutely find the support you need here, regardless of what your spirituality is. And it doesn't matter what religion you're in. And I take it as my personal mission that no matter what you believe, I'll help you nurture it, right? Because it's all about the spiritual side of it when we're looking at it at that. And even further, when we're looking at 12-step, when we're looking at self-help, when we're looking at therapy, when we're looking at all these aspects of things that we do for ourselves to be better, what are we really teaching? We're teaching golden rule, and we're teaching mindfulness. Mm-hmm. And those things are reiterated over and over again, no matter what program of self-help you're doing or what you're trying to get past, right? So let's reorient this higher power towards that, and let's get a grasp on it from that side of things, and then we can attack the higher power. And then I usually end it with talking to them about how I use Bill Murray because I had nothing better for the time being, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And for me now, my higher power is the universe, because there's an asteroid we haven't seen that's going to hit us before we're done doing this podcast, mm-hmm. and none of this matters past this moment anyways. And that's my mindfulness, and that's my give up and let God, and that's how I survived and got what I needed. But it shut me off at first, and I had to have an experience with somebody who really could put it into that perspective before I could move forward from there and get the help that I needed.
Yeah, and I think for so many addicts and people who do, have substance use disorder issues, and they're struggling. I know for me, when I was out using, and I was more of a druggie than I was a drinker.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even really remember drinking, to be quite honest with you. It was just drugs the whole time for me, but I digress because it doesn't matter. And so I think for me, though, I felt so powerful when I was using, and I obviously didn't trust anyone, right? The isolation, I don't trust anyone. Someone's going to hurt me. And so I truly believed, especially when I was under the influence of drugs, meth was my drug of choice, I was the most powerful person.
Yeah.
I was the most powerful person in my life. Nobody had control over me. I was in control. And so what I tell people is, we got to get you to a point of understanding that the reason why you're here is because you're not in control of you. You're not all powerful, because if you were, you wouldn't be having this conversation with me. So we just need to get you. And then I go, okay, have you ever been into the ocean? I have. I grew up on the ocean. And there were times I'd be out surfing. My body would slam to the ground under a wave. I would get pinned to the ocean floor. I have a couple of memories where I thought I was going to drown because I could not move. That's how powerful the wave was. Well, in that moment, in my early stages of recovery, I looked at my sponsor and I was like, well, I guess the ocean is stronger than me. It's more powerful than me. And just that belief of being like, okay, something's greater than you, like something is more powerful than you, find that peace. And he asked me, if you can go to a place that is the most peaceful place for you, where is that place? And I would say there's this place in Laguna Beach. There's these beautiful rocks that are right there on the ocean. And I could just go sit there and stare out into the ocean. And he goes, that, my friend, is your higher power. That is a place that brings you peace. And it is much more powerful than you, which is why you go to seek it out in order to find peace. Because you, Brandon, cannot find peace within yourself. And so that got me past the whole God thing and the 12 steps and blah, blah, blah. Because I grew up Catholic. So I grew up as a gay kid being shamed at Catholic school by a bunch of nuns and priests telling me each and every day, son, you're going to burn in hell. Yeah. Right. So I couldn't attach on to that whole God word at the beginning stages. And I work from there. Let's find that place of peace. We all have one. We all have a place we like to go to. It's usually in nature, if I'm being quite honest with you. And I don't care what your belief is in God, because as you said, to me, life is all about the golden rule. Whether you think there's an afterlife, I don't care. I'm not going to have an argument with that. It's your belief. I don't care if you believe in it or not. If I do, great. I do believe that there is an afterlife for me. It gives me a sense of purpose, as I believe my soul has a purpose here in this earth to help other people. Well, guess what that aligns with? An atheist who believes in the golden rule, right? We're talking the same thing. We're just using different terminologies as a way to get there.
It's hilarious to me when we get to that point too, because it's like, here's the reality of it: is you do good because you believe that there's this afterlife you want to get to that you can get to if you do good.
Right.
I don't believe in that. Right. So a lot of times I get that. Well, how do you fall in line with moralistic ideals? Like, what keeps you from just going and robbing a store? It's like, well, because I believe that right now, this is what I have, right? Like this life right here, this is it, right? Why wouldn't I want to make it the best possible that I can? Like, why wouldn't I want to make the next right decision in everything that I do, whether it be talking to someone who needs it, eating a good breakfast today, whatever it may be? Why wouldn't I want to make the next right choice to keep my life productive and thriving if I believe it's the only one I have?
I mean, and that right there, and that... I just think it takes open-minded people to have that open discussion, right? Because it's just we live in a tribalism society, right? We just live in these tribes, and it's like, gosh, if you don't believe in my tribe and you don't, subscribe to all of the beliefs that I have in my tribe, well, then you're wrong.
Yeah.
And that to me is the barrier we have to break through within mental health in order to really help people.
Yeah, completely. And it's, again, it's my favorite part of my job is getting to help those that are struggling with those concepts, because I don't know. I'm not, might be tooting my horn on this, but I like dissecting it with them and helping them and watching these epiphany moments come to them when they realize that it's okay for them to believe whatever they truly believe. We can work with that and go from there. And when they have that epiphany of, I don't have to change everything I'm doing or everything I believe in, I can work with what I've got. Cool. We can go.
What's your message? What's your role over at Calvary is?
I'm a case manager.
Cool. So you're working hand in hand with these folks, guiding them through the whole recovery process, making sure they're up on their therapies and kind of guiding them.
My main focus is discharge planning, right? Let's make sure you have everything you need for when you leave here, right? But we have kind of a unique view of your traditional discharge planner, case manager. I get to lead groups with patients, right? Like I get to run our steps 1, 2, and 3 with patients. I get to I'm point person for crisis, right? Our case managers are the only ones that are from the clinical team that are on the unit. So if a patient's in crisis, it's to our office immediately. So I usually see those patients and get to help them from there, and it's a fun job.
Yeah. And a different day every day.
Very much. Very much.
I've learned that really in behavioral health, you know, going from session to session at Art of Our Soul, it's like, man, you just see it all within a day. What would be your message, to folks out there who are either struggling themselves? Okay, let's start with that one. And then we'll get to the people around those people, the families who know somebody within their family system is struggling, but they have no idea. They feel helpless. What's your message to those person, like the guy I just spoke to on the phone the last 6 months, every month, trying to, encourage him as best I can to go to treatment and understanding the consequences if he does not? What would be your message to that person who knows that they are struggling, but is afraid to go to residential treatment?
It'd be the same message I tell our patients that want to leave against medical advice or do our detox but don't want to come to residential. It's if you don't do this, you don't have anything else anyways. And part of it too is one of the things we dissect is like what you have left to lose when we're doing our steps and things like that. And a lot of people just put, what'll happen if you continue down this path? I'll die. I'm sorry, but that's not a consequence. In my opinion, let's look at everything that you currently have that goes away before you even get there. Let's talk about the suffering that you can still endure through all of this. And let's look at those things. Reach out, get the help before we get there.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I've never actually looked at it as death is not a consequence because it's done. Like you're done. Dead. You haven't lost your car, you haven't lost your house, you haven't lived on the homeless.
That's the period, right?
Yeah,
that's the end.
That's the period. There's so much more that happens oftentimes before that point. Now, what's your message to the loved ones? The loved ones who feel hopeless and helpless. And yes, there's a ton of enabling, which I wish that every parent, I wish there was a guide, right? What is enabling versus what is helping? Two very big things. I don't have time to go through it all, but if go online and just type in enabling versus helping. There are some really great graphics out there that kind of explain very straightforward the difference between enabling versus helping. Two very different things. A lot of times parents think that they are helping when, my God, I'm like, holy cow, you are enabling. And as a matter of fact, you could be sending your child to their death faster by these actions that you're doing.
My wife talks about it every now and again. She got involved with PALS groups, which is guidance for families who have people in treatment or active in addiction. I still wish I could have seen the look on her face when she realized the enabling things she was doing when they were dissecting those things. My biggest thing is start looking that up, right? Like, how are you enabling? And past that, my bigger thing when it comes to families, loved ones, support systems that are struggling through this as well, get a therapist. Period. The end. You got healing to do too. And then from there, I'm usually like, let's set some hard boundaries because those things are not just going to save their life, but they're going to help you feel better too.
What does Calvary do? I know that there are some treatment centers out there who really do also while their loved one is in treatment. They're in constant contact with the families, or they're also kind of helping create an aftercare program and making sure that the families are healed too. Because if the families aren't healing, oftentimes that enabling behavior can continue after and actually be as destructive as before that their loved one went to treatment. I think we have to break this idea in the minds of a lot of families is that they're the problem. Go to treatment, be better, and then come back into our family system. But guess what? children are byproducts of the family system in which got them into treatment. And sometimes those families need to do a little introspective work as to their own behaviors as well.
So at Calvary specifically, we had family programming for a while. We unfortunately lost our family liaison, so that's I believe we've been looking for a replacement for a while. So if anybody's listening and is available, reach out to our clinical director. But past that, when a patient hits our unit within 24 hours, we do a family call, right? First priority is home safety check: guns, drugs, weapons, dangerous items. Let's get them out of the house. Second aspect: what's your perspective on what's going on? Third part is here's some resources for you. Usually I give out pals.org. It's a great resource for anybody with a loved one who's going through this, or even a friend. Like, anybody can jump in on those meetings. But past with that too, I also say, you've got to do your healing as well. And I always recommend couples counseling, family counseling, and I offer to help find those services while they're in there and get the patient involved with it. But I seek them to seek their own support as well, because through a lot of the support systems, even if they're immediately reaching for them, thinking that they're learning how to heal from the problem they just sent to treatment, by proxy, they start realizing some of their own behaviors that may have been attributing to this, or that may have been enabling, or where they didn't hold firm boundaries, or things that they may have had a hand in with helping create where we're at now. So those resources are usually my go-to to get families involved with. Past that, it's, I'm not a therapist, right? So I can't really get into that aspect with them of talking to them from those points of view. I don't have the formal training to do so. So I tend to stay away from giving direct advice with those things and just really push them to seek out their own therapist. I'm a big believer that even a person in their most sane mind needs a therapist, right?
Everybody does. I won't date anybody unless they're seeing a therapist.
I think that's a very fair thing to have on a list.
My therapist, right? I have two, because I'm just special like that. I need two. But yeah, one of my 5 non-negotiables is you have to be willing to be vulnerable enough to continue working on yourself.
Yeah.
And oftentimes working on yourself, you need to be working with somebody else in order to guide you on how to improve, right? It goes back to that narcissism notion of a lot of addicts and the time of their drug using is I can fix me and I can work on myself. No, you're not just going to read a self-help book and think that that's going to work you.
That's not how it goes.
No, it can feed you. It can plant some seeds. I always say those self-help books are really great at just planting seeds for you then to take that next step. So yeah, one of my 5 non-negotiables is ongoing work on yourself, and that means a therapist. Because, listen, communication skills are always going to break down, and I want a healthy relationship. And I'm like, God, therapy is not a bad thing. We got to flip the script on that. Therapy is actually a quite healthy thing. You learn to communicate better so that you can have a better relationship. So if your end goal is having a great relationship, albeit with a lover or a partner or your family, right? But I'll be honest with you, my therapist has got me to the point of understanding that my family relationship is unhealthy, and it's okay to accept it as unhealthy to protect me.
Yeah.
To protect me. I'm not seeking therapy to fix my family, to fix me and so I can deal with my family. My therapist got me to understand actually they're unhealed. Some of them are unhealed. It can be very dangerous for you. Okay? So I'm not just going to here to teach you skills just so you can handle your family because you think in this lifetime, just because they're blood, that you are forced to be around them. Okay? This is about me healing myself. And I always sell this too, right? If I'm on this healing journey and you're not, guess what? I'm just getting more elevated in the growth that I believe my soul is here. So there's obviously not going to be that same that same connection. And I don't believe in forced connections. I don't believe that you should ever feel forced to have to be around certain people just because they're blood.
Every human being has the right to cut off toxic. Every human being does. If it's not good, get away from it. And granted, there's a lot more to it than that, right? Like, it's a lot harder than that. And
it's hard with family. The family dynamics make it very hard, but at the same time, listen, this is my life.
Yeah, the kids that grow up with true narcissism in their households, right? Like, a lot of the time the only option is to cut contacts.
Correct.
For you to have any
sanity within your own life.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's one of those things where I hear it all the time. Well, we're family. I'm like, who cares?
Right.
Who cares? If you're toxic, why am I around you?
Right. And if you're not working on yourself to better yourself, and I think that's the difference too, and I'll come at it this way too, is that as long as you show me that you're actually doing steps to heal from that And to just be better, I'm down to continue attempting a relationship. But listen, if you're at that level where you think that you are absolutely fine, sorry. Like, there's just no way a positive relationship can ever come out of that.
And the other part, too, is knowing when you can affect those things as well, too. I watch people go down that rabbit hole all the time when it comes to family and friends, is them trying to push and get them to better themselves so that they can have this relationship. And there'll be, this, okay, I'm doing it. Well, I stopped doing it. I didn't like doing that. And it's right back to the same things.
Right.
And it's this juggle. It's this up and down roller coaster of trying to heal the other person so that they can be in your life, because you don't want to give it up, even though it's toxic, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's be real on when it's time to cut ties, cut cords, get toxic out when it needs to be out. If there's chance for change, cool, but don't live in denial about if that's real or not.
Yeah, I love that. Let's do a closing message. What would be your closing kind of final thought for those who are, watching or listening right now? What would be your kind of closing thought?
Well, assuming that the majority that are watching this are either in the industry or in recovery or looking to seek out recovery.
That is the audience. Yeah.
my closing thought is reach out and get some help. Like, it's not too late. As long as you're alive, there is a chance for change.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you on that. And my closing message for this session would be, listen, I don't care how many times you've relapsed. I don't care at all. That's why I don't collect chips. I just don't. A majority of people in recovery will experience a relapse on their journey. That is just the truth. And I know I get a lot of heat from a lot of AAers out there.
If they say they haven't, they're probably lying.
It's just, and I get some, I won't say a lot. I get some AAers that come at me really hard. Well, relapse doesn't have to be part of your story. I was like, yeah, I used to be a circuit speaker. I used to travel the country at AA conventions. I know those phrases, but my reality, the folks that I see, and I see about 60 to 80 addicts a day in my studio, 100% of the people who walk in the doors at Art of Our Soul, who are in residential treatment programs, have experienced relapse as part of their journey. Let's remove the stigma. Let's remove the shame. And my relapse, after about 11 years of continuous recovery, in November 2020, ended up being the biggest blessing of my life. Okay, so relapse was my biggest blessing. Am I encouraging you to go out and relapse right now? No, I'm not. But I'm just saying that experience turned out to be the biggest blessing of my life. It gave me what I have today. So if you're sitting there and you're beating yourself up over a relapse, stop. It's okay. It is okay. And I just think it's important that people in the recovery community sometimes can be the most judgy, that we stop judging folks, stop shaming them. And when we say, keep coming back, don't say it like that. Say it genuinely. Keep coming back as many times as it takes. There's a difference in how we say it. It's one of the things that's always bugged me at those meetings. When somebody relapses, they sit in the back, keep coming back. I'm like, dude, you say it like that, it's very patronizing.
Can I add to what you're saying real quick? Because it's one of those things that I will bring up wherever I can. Is there's a specific phrase: "The one is too many, and 1,000's not enough." I'm not a fan of that phrase. It trains people to think that if they've had a small relapse, they may as well continue on and just wreak havoc. You don't have to do that.
No, at all.
It's not a failure.
It's not a failure. And I'll even take it a step further. You don't start over at 24 hours. That really hits a lot of people at their, it really hits a lot of AAers at their core. If somebody relapses and they had 5 years, they do not start over at 24 hours. Come at me as hard as you want in that community. I don't care.
The loss of days will cause people to relapse. It's the guilt of I had 5 years and it's gone.
It's gone. And so you know what they see, you know what they think. And this, I'm telling you from my own experience, because when I was an active member of AA and I had 11 years and somebody goes, you need to go back to a meeting and collect a white chip. And you know what went through my mind? F that. Like, why am I even going to continue? I can't do those 11 years over. I cannot go back to square one. And so that was just too daunting for me. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. And so I wanted people to know is that you don't lose all of the education, all of your experiences of that time that you have, you just pick up where you left off. Like, come on, use it as a moment of, okay, well, just what do I need to do differently this time?
Let's build on it.
Let's build on it.
Let's build on it. Let's not live in the shame. Let's get rid of the shame and guilt, please. And
There
let's
is a
build
saying.
off of this.
We learn from our mistakes. That means you have to make a mistake in order to learn. We learn from our mistakes. Perfectionism does not exist. So why the hell are we putting that pressure on folks in behavioral health?
Yes.
Let's stop it.
Yes.
Full stop. So anyway, that's my rant. Damn, that was a little bit of a rant.
That was a long outro.
That was a long outro. My bad. Anyway, Richard, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And if you want information on Calvary Healing Center, we've been putting that information down here at the bottom of this podcast the whole time. I definitely refer people to Calvary. I have known the folks over there for years, and I believe wholeheartedly not only in their detox program, but also their treatment program. So anyway, if you're looking for treatment for you or a loved one, definitely check out Calvary Healing Center right here in Central Phoenix. We'll see you back here for the next episode of Escaping Rock Bottom.